evening all. In the words of Britain's greatest policeman, Dixon of Dock Green. Yeah, 20 years that series ran on television. I'll come to Dixon in a moment. Now this is a primer on the history of the police in this country, particularly since the war and how it was formed, what the problems were in the past, what was solved, its current condition, and what should be done about the problems now, in my view. Now, distaste and mistrust of the police seems to be growing fast. It's difficult to find much positive comment in any media from the public. Even the not so well-founded nostalgia for a supposed past golden age of policing, finest in the world and so on, even that part of post-war self-congratulations seems to be waning. Now, is this distrust and distaste of the police for the police justified, or perhaps a contagion of misunderstanding, perhaps generated by those with grudges? Trust in the police is vital for a healthy society, so the mere fact of widespread alarm and mistrust, even if just unjustified, requires attention. Policing is too serious for political knockabout, and I laboured long and hard about what to say in this talk. I read a large volume of material about the police and watched umpteen videos of the police in action. Some of the ones about videos about misconduct beggared belief in the degree of sheer criminality. It did my health no good watching this stuff, I can tell you. Perhaps the worst was the man who was stripped naked and suffered to what amounted to a sexual assault in the cells by several policemen. But the really terrifying thing wasn't that the police assaulted him. That didn't surprise me at all by this stage. The really terrifying thing was that they weren't deterred by their own security cameras. They were so secure, they were so sure they were untouchable. They were willing to do it in front of security cameras. And of course there are other cases like I've watched on YouTube. This untouchability thing with the police, people join, they start to think, I can do what I like. The system will always support me. Well, it doesn't, of course, always. People get thrown overboard. But too many join the police and start thinking this way. Of course, there are many police who do a brilliant job where really serious crime is concerned, like murder, and hats off to them. But that does not dictate that we should do what the justice system patronisingly fooled the public into doing not so many years ago. Just leave it all to your betters. We know what we're doing. You little people don't need to worry about the police or the courts. We're the experts. Leave it to us. There was that attitude. There was a horrible denouement followed in the 1980s. Now, who would say a thing like this? The police are out of control. Well, surely somebody who's terminally discontented, maybe not doing too well in life. Well, actually, it was the prominent barrister Michael Mansfield in my local paper. He wrote to the paper saying the police are out of control. Now, when the Queen's Counsel says such a thing publicly, it should capture attention. And then again, a couple of years ago, a police commissioner from somewhere in the north of England on Newsnight said that in his area, juries will no longer convict on the basis of the evidence of a single policeman. Friends and family had too many bad experiences with police lying. The former head of Royal Protection on the radio recently said that respect for the police has disappeared in parts of the country. Now, in my lifetime, we've never seen anything like this before, this distrust for the police. Maybe people should have been more mistrustful many years ago. Then there was Cameron's extraordinary letter shown redacted in the newspapers, where he affirmed to the security services that anyone authorised by them could carry out criminal acts if they thought they were dealing with some security matter or serious crime. Does that sound all right to you? Well, suicide bombers perhaps? Well, some readers of the Daily Mail thought it was all right. Oh, well, they wouldn't use them against anybody except, say, suicide bombers. Well, any agents given powers like that, they'll sooner or later be abused and extended to people who are inconvenient. That's what happens if you give bureaucracies power. They use it. Anyone can said to be a risk if it suits those in power, and they will be. If powers are given, they'll be used. There was a judge appointed for oversight of this policy of allowing the security service to use criminal methods, and he was told not to comment on the legality of what was being done. If that's not the police out of control, what is? They can be criminal, and even a judge who has oversight of this is not supposed to comment on the matter. It's quite extraordinary. Never seen anything like. I mean, that letter in the paper was quite astonishing. The letter was actually shown in the Mail, but the Guardian also covered it quite well. Guardian covered it better than better than a male did. MI5 provides immunity for agents criminal act, tribunals told. Yeah? How far are they willing to go? Murder? James Bond? I think they call this the James Bond, something of James Bond clause in the security services. Now, the reason why the modern police in this country were formed in the way they were in the 1820s, because before then there was no real police force. They were parish constables, unpaid. It's a very fragmented, law and order is a very fragmented business. And the police were established in the 1820s in the form they were, precisely because of justified fears that an organised police force would become a tool of political power against the public, used by the government. John Quincy Adams, one of the American revolutionaries, said, "Passions are the same in all men, and unchecked, if those passions are unchecked, fraud, violence and cruelty result," said John Quincy Adams. Ain't that right? Give people power. Well, about 40 years ago, the famous radical judge, Lord Denning, said he disliked media inquiries and outsider inquiries into the police and the justice system, since he maintained that all it did was to diminish confidence. So supposedly then, Lord Denning thought all was well. Why would you want to resist inquiries if things are bad? If things are well, we don't need these inquiries. Now perhaps he was genuinely a little naive. I mean, he came from a different generation. I mean, maybe he generally believed what the courts maintained at the time, the police would never lie. I mean, up until fairly recently, try a defence against a charge saying that the police lied, the courts simply wouldn't accept it. It meant, if they accepted it, it meant their system was at a risk of collapsing, which depended on belief. You had to believe in a system, otherwise it doesn't work. So supposedly, according to Lord Denning, all was well. Seems extraordinary today that Denning should have thought like that. What system ever held itself incorruptible without constant vigilance? But there was a more sneaky line that went on in the age of the police would never lie. And that was, well, all right, on the quiet, I'll tell you. Yeah, okay, they do lie, but if they're corrupt, they're only doing it in the noble cause of controlling crime. It's called noble cause corruption. And you could see that in G.F. Newman's Law and Order series, which I'll come to in a minute. But a policeman says to some criminal, "You're overdue." But basically, if we think you've done something, we can't catch you, we'll pick you up. That's what they used to do, and they call it noble cause corruption. Now, not long after Lord Denning's remarks on the media, he shouldn't interfere in criminal matters, not long afterwards in the 1980s, there were revelations of a succession of horrific miscarriages of justice due to police corruption, with nothing noble about it at all. The police have extraordinary powers. They can inflict on any of us. Some perfectly ordinary chap from down a side street, he suddenly joins the police, and in, I don't know how long it is, 3 months, 6 months, I think they reduced it to 3 months. In 3 months, he's got powers over his fellow citizens that even the Prime Minister doesn't have. Considerable legal powers, and in practice, a lot of illegal powers too, because the police bend the law all the time and exceed their authority, knowing that most of the people they're dealing with won't know the difference. Extraordinary powers are given to them. In fact, it requires a person with a really strong moral constitution to be a police officer. It's too easily you can be too easily led astray by other people. Now, it's essential that to have a police force and people given these powers, there has to be constant, relentless inspection of what they're doing and ability to complain effectively. Well, as long ago as 1982, Lord Scarman, in his report on the rioting in Brixton, said that people he talked to after the riots when he investigated the matter did not believe the complaints they made would be investigated fairly and expected harassment if they did complain. Scarman, in fact, wanted an independent complaints procedure, generally independent complaints procedure into the police. We are still waiting. Now, 40 years ago, 40 years later, there's a solicitor called Ian Gold who specialises in cases against the police, and he also blogs. And this is what he says, very recently, a few weeks ago. It remains the case that the police disciplinary system is inherently biased in favour of the police. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the unwritten mission statement of most professional standards departments is not to root out, but rather to protect corrupt officers and to make excuses for police misbehaviour. Certainly this seems to be the practical result of most police complaint investigations that I've witnessed. This is sinister. Well, most of the investigations of complaints against the police are in fact conducted by the police, although there is an independent theory, an independent body overlooking it. They actually investigate themselves. Well, there's no intrinsic reason why the police shouldn't do a good job investigating themselves. But according to Ian Gold, they don't. Now, with the opinions of the police expressing unprecedented dissatisfaction in my lifetime, in fact, only last week the inspectorate pronounced the Cleveland police force to be inadequate, not providing a satisfactory service. The police commissioner there is actually resigning. So one might think that the police in this circumstance will be very, very careful, present themselves positively. The new head of the Metropolitan Police Professional Standards is Assistant Chief Constable who was found guilty of several disciplinary offences, and it was something about pushing somebody into a desk. The papers reported this a week or two ago. So 3 disciplinary charges. You'd think they would want to get somebody with a squeaky clean record to head investigations into wrong behaviour by the police, wouldn't you? Wouldn't they want to get somebody who just not so far long ago had been up on disciplinary charges himself? Now, what this actually tells me is that the police are a self-serving bureaucracy that believes itself untouchable. It's no surprise that government agencies, generally quangos and government agencies, are self-serving bureaucracies. The government agencies are notorious for being self-serving. The self-serving bureaucracy, it has as its main objectives its own internal benefit, growth and continuance. It's like they become like, if they're left to themselves, they become like a cancer. It eventually will kill the host. They suck the energy out of the host and grow if they can. They think themselves it's the untouchable theme again. You know? We really don't care what you think, because we can do what we like, really. And the reason for that, fundamentally, with the police, who are particularly well placed to express that view, is because politicians rely on them for protection and continuance of their system. So, from their point of view, why would the government want to touch us? Well, if we do, we may not protect you properly. That's the thinking behind it, I believe. Now, I want to talk for a bit about the history of the police and why the modern police were formed in the way they were in the 1820s. The principles which they theoretically still abide by, although in practice they don't. And the reason the police are in the form that they claim to be, or not, they're not really in that form anymore. The reason why they were formed in this way, quite extraordinary in the power of history, it was because there were 3 revolutions in the 17th century. The king was executed, and then another king came back, and then another king was expelled. And during the 18th century, Georgian Englishmen were incredibly proud of their freedoms. As far as they were concerned, ferociously proud. As far as they were concerned, we're not those poor devils over on the other side of the channel, living under these authoritarian kings. We're free men. And that extended down to people in the Navy, the Royal Navy. You don't see that in Hollywood films. Their attitude was, I'm a free Englishman. If you want me on your ship, you've got to make it worth your while. And if it wasn't made worth their while, they made a lot of trouble. The reason there's a stone screen in front of the Admiralty is because the Admirals got fed up with all the seamen turning up and complaining. They wanted to keep them away from the Admirals while they were getting in and out of their carriages. That's why it was built around 76. Georgian Englishmen were ferociously proud of their freedoms. And when Robert Peel, as Home Secretary in the 1820s, proposed forming a centralised, modern, paid police force, there was a lot of resistance to it. People felt that it would be used as an instrument of repression. They were quite right. So what Robert Peel did was, he came up with a scheme where the police would be non-militaristic. They weren't to have helmets and swords and guns and things, not in general anyway. They'd just have a uniform. Lots of people had uniforms in those days, servants. Those of servants had a uniform, and they had to have some protection. They were given a truncheon, that's all they got, a truncheon and a whistle. The point of the whistle, I'll come to in a moment. So they weren't militarised, and very important, their primary function was not to catch criminals, but to prevent crime. Now, how many people here aside from our lawyers, obviously. How many people here have heard of Peel's rules? One person, yeah? Only one? Yeah. Well, here's a few copies of it to hand out. There's a few copies there. Here are Peel's rules. Peel's Principles of Law Enforcement, 1829. Now, nobody knows who wrote Peel's rules. It might have been Peel in conjunction with somebody else, possibly a commissioner called Maine. Nobody really knows, but they're quite extraordinary. If you read this, it's difficult to believe it was written at a time when hardly anybody had the vote. They're so forward-looking, they look like something handed down by the gods on tablets of stone for all time. The wisdom in that page is unbelievable. The first rule is, the basic mission for which police exist is to prevent crime and disorder as an alternative to the repression of crime and disorder by military force and severity of legal punishment. Well, now, what do the police do now? They're looking to see who they can arrest and punish. That's their main function. Their priority function is to arrest and punish people, not to prevent crime. Now, I mentioned the whistle the police had. In 19th century England, a policeman passed every door every 45 minutes. There was a system of interlock patrols, and it was arranged so that if they needed help, they could blow their whistle, and there'd be another policeman within hearing distance. Yeah, it was all about prevention. And Dixon of Dock Green was a fictional representation of the Pelian officer, designed for propaganda, of course, but that's what it was. It's difficult to believe this was written when hardly anybody had the vote. The public are the police, and the police are the public. The only difference between the police, the citizen, the police and the public, the only difference between the police and other citizens is they happen to get paid for it and do it full time. And the police should be embedded in society, not a militia waiting to oppress you. In fact, the public in uniform. Now, not so many. When I was a child, every policeman was expected to know Peel's rules or the principles of them off by heart. They had it drummed into them. This is what you're doing, Peel's rules. Of course, they didn't do it a lot of the time, but at least the principle was there. Now, since World War II, we've gone through 4 phases of policing. And the first lasted until the late 1960s. It's known in the literature as the Dixon era, after Dixon of Dock Green. Dixon was intended to portray the perfect Pelian officer, reassuring, mature, and full of common sense. If you saw Peel coming towards you in the street, if you saw Dixon coming towards you in the street, think, oh good, the police are here, I'm safe. Well, if I see the police coming anywhere near me in the street now, I'm worried, and I'm not trying to rob a bank, but you think, are they going to pick on me for something? Because they're looking around for people to pick on. It's all up to ticking up arrests. So the Dixon area, the job was controlling crime, not ticking a box for the number of arrests. The middle classes believed in Peel's, in the representation of the police in Dixon of Dock Green, because the police largely left them alone. There were 2 reasons for that. First of all, class deference was still there, and the view was that the middle class are the basis of society, the backbone of it, not like these nasty workers, who of course did all the work. So there's a lot of difference towards the middle class. They tend to leave it, but also also very important, the police were well aware that the middle class could afford lawyers, so they weren't such easy targets. Working class guy knows nothing about the law, hasn't got a lawyer. I mean, he's putty in the hands of the police, really, isn't he? Yeah? They can tell them anything. The working class at the time, during the Dixon era, were not so easily fooled. But the middle class believed everything was fine. Hence the enduring myth of the golden age of policing. There were warnings were received that things were not right. The early 1960s, somebody called Harold Challoner, he was a detective sergeant around Soho, and he was planting evidence on people, beating them in the cells. He'd been popular for beating up prisoners during World War II. He was in special forces. But on one occasion he beat up somebody in the cells and sang while he was beating him, bongo, bongo, bongo. I wish I'd stayed in the Congo. It's all awfully amusing, this stuff, isn't it? Now, Harold Challoner, he broke the basic rule of Dixon policing. He tried it on a middle-class person. Somebody from the Council, the National Council of Civil Liberties, he planted a brick on him, told him you'll get 2 years for that. Well, the guy, he got lawyers and forensic experts. And it all came out about Harold Challoner and his men and what they'd been doing. Interesting insight into Challoner. I remember many years ago reading the paper that what Challoner used to tell his men was, get me some charge. Get out in the streets and get me some charge. So it was all about arresting people. It wasn't about preventing crime. It was about bringing as many people through the police station and somehow getting them into the courts. Harold Challoner got caught. It was a huge scandal, and he was going to come to trial, I think, at the Old Bailey. And then he was suddenly diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and sent to a mental hospital. Yeah? Now, was that genuine? I suspect it probably wasn't. That smells to me like a state arrangement, because the advantage of having Challoner diagnosed as a schizophrenic was twofold. Firstly, it meant there was no trial, so all the nasties that could have come out of the trial didn't come out, because the priority of the system was to maintain confidence. And secondly, the police could claim, as they did, well, he's just an isolated lunatic. We couldn't have foreseen this. This is part of a standard police PR tactic which has been used since Kingdom Come. If you press the police on, do you ever do anything wrong? They'll first say, oh no, nothing at all. If you press them hard and give an example, they'll say, oh well, we're a grand bunch of blokes, but there are bad apples. And you think to yourself, well, that sounds sensible, you understand that. Thousands of people hide, there are going to be some bad apples. It's completely misleading. Any organisation hiring thousands of people will have bad apples in it. That's inevitable. It's not whether you have bad apples, it's whether they can do anything bad. That's the point. And in the police, most police malpractice is done with the knowledge of other policemen. So why don't they do anything about it? How could Rotherham happen? Yeah? The vast majority of police in Rotherham are decent chaps. How could Rotherham happen as the Rotherham scandal go on for years? Why didn't they stop it? And the answer is because it's a self-serving bureaucracy. They all want to back one another up, and if you don't back me up, I won't back you up. And a complaint system that would rather ignore malpractice. Another version, another PR line is, we risk our lives for you, so it wouldn't be really correct to look too closely at what we do. Well, as Peter Hitchens said, lots of people take risk their lives doing things. Journalists go out to war areas and risk their lives. People who work in construction work, building, lots of them are killed and injured. They risk their lives too. But nobody suggests that these professions shouldn't be criticised. So they do this special pleading about we risk our lives and the bad apples. So Challoner actually was never taken to court, although some of his colleagues got long prison sentences. And this is what a book that was published shortly afterwards says about the Challoner business. Challoner conveniently went mad before his trial, and the old regime at the Yard was able to convince the public that he was a singular and insane rotten apple rather than the tip of a substantial iceberg. As a result, the exhaustive overhaul of London CID that Challoner's case might have provoked was deferred for several years in which a large number of London detectives grew fat and dangerous. When the authorities finally had to confront this situation, they found themselves with the task of dealing not only with detectives and sergeants and detective constables behaving corruptly at a street level, but with the even greater problem posed by the fact that their superiors, up to commander level, who had come up through the same lucrative system themselves, were happy to protect subordinates following in their footsteps. This is when living memory in Britain. You see, this was in a Penguin book published in the 1970s, not some fringe sort of document. So that was what was happening. The warning from Harold Challoner was in war. There was ignored. There was a public inquiry, and it was all sort of brushed under the carpet as a single lunatic. So things went on like that. Things went on like that until, again, for another 6 or 7 years, till the late 1960s, when the Sunday Times did a big expose on their front page about police corruption and bribery and bribes. It was a big business. Taking money was a big business. And then after that, things came to a head, and something had to be done. And the Home Office appointed Sir Robert Mark as a new police commissioner. And he famously said, well, if the police can arrest more criminals than we've got in our own ranks, we'll be doing well. He threatened us to put all the CID back in uniform. And he he had a meeting with the heads of the CID, and he told them, we're not going to stand for this any longer. And one of them went back to his men and said, the good old days are over. Yeah? Told you what was going on, wasn't it? One of the fiddles at the time was, if people were in the cells, the policeman would say, give us 25 quid and I'll see you get bail. In fact, even that was a fiddle, because the police chose people who were going to get bail anyway. And so they didn't even get value money for the bride. This sort of thing was going on a huge scale. And this is the golden age of policing that people still seem to believe in. See, the basic problem is that we have an adversarial system of justice in this country. The police are not in practice independent, neutral investigators of whether an offence has been committed. They just want to get bodies into court. In fact, a former policeman was telling me recently he went to a reunion, and one policeman saying to another, my squad used to arrest more people than your squad. Great. And the other one said, yeah, but mine had all done something. But it's a joke. It's a joke, but it tells you something about the mindset. Getting bodies up into the dock and getting people to it, creating criminal records for people. It's nothing to do with Peelian policing, where the priority was to prevent crime. It's an adversarial system of justice, and there are real big problems with this. You can see that in any court. There are two sides engaged in a sort of boxing match. The prosecution and defence is a sort of boxing match. Who can win by the wiliest and cleverest methods. So the second phase began in the late 1960s with the revelations in the Sunday Times and the appointment of Robert Mark as the Commissioner, later Lord Mark. So Mark did his utmost to try and clean up the police. He had some success, but still later in the 1970s corruption was still going on a very large scale. And then in 1978, G.F. Newman produced a very famous series of plays called Law and Order. Anyone ever see Law and Order on television in the 1970s? It was all about, it was a fictional play in 4 episodes, but it was all about police corruption. And it caused such a stink that the government tried to stop it being seen in other countries, and some politicians demanded that G.F. Newman should be charged with sedition, although it came to nothing. In fact, G.F. Newman said at the time he thought that 90% of the police were corrupt. And he said quite recently, he's still around, he said quite recently he saw no reason to change his mind. Well, I don't think that's really true. I think what it is, a lot of what goes on is people are corrupt and other people don't want to say anything about it. That's what happened in Rotherham, surely, yeah? And so people get sucked in as accessories because they don't want to rock the boat, because they'll be unpopular with their mates, unpopular with the organisation. Organisations don't like whistleblowers, do they? They really don't like whistleblowers. So around that time that Law and Order was shown on television, it was shown again actually fairly recently, but the BBC kept it under wraps for years, nobody saw it. And around that time, just before G.F. Newman's series of plays, there was a Royal Commission set up to look at police procedure. And that led to the biggest change in policing since the war, the introduction of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act in 1986. There was a lot to it, a great deal of detail to it, but two of the really important points about the Police and Criminal Evidence Act was that if the police wanted to detain people, they had to arrest them. You can't just detain them in some kind of halfway house, as the police used to do, without arresting them. And also to try to stop verballing, the invention of statements that the accused was said to have made. They introduced tape recording of interviews. The police used to make up things wholesale about what people had said, implausible things, totally implausible things. It was pretty much on the level of, fair enough, Guff, I'm banged to rights, I'm holding my hands up to the flag. It was as corny as that, a lot of it, yeah? It was a joke, but since the courts were so determined to believe the police, to maintain competence in the system, they were able to get away with this. So I just want to tell a little story of something that happened to me before PACE came into force, not long before, which is quite telling. There were stories circulating in the paper that black men were being seized by the police in Hackney and shoved in the vans and taken away to the cells for no reason. Yep, these stories. Well, it happened to me. I was walking out of a cafe one day after having my lunch. I was walking out there reading the paper, and this policeman came up and said, "Get in the van." He didn't give a reason. There was no reason, yeah? Got in the van, taken off, locked in the cells for a couple of hours, searched, they didn't find anything, let me go. No apology, of course. Now, if you have a suspicious mind, you may well say, well, why did they pick on you? Why did they pick on you, eh? Well, I'll tell you why they picked on me, because I was plastering a wall, and I had old dirty clothes on, covered in plaster. Now, that in the police mindset means you count as somebody who's in a weak position in life, yeah? And I think the black men who were seized off the streets, they maintained it was racism due to their black skin. I don't think it was that so much. I think just the police saw them as easy targets. They saw me as an easy target because I had dirty clothes on. That's very important insight, I think, into the police mind. They'll pick on you if they think you're in a weak position. Now also the other change, apart from the Police and Criminal Act, which was very detailed, there were rules on searches, you had to have reasonable suspicion. Well, they can get around that easily. As one policeman said in a book published in the 90s, if I want to search somebody, I haven't got a good reason, I just make one up. I say something like, an old woman told me he was selling drugs. She saw him selling drugs or buying, so I just make up anything. But there was an attempt made with Pace, a strong attempt to make the police behave according to some reasonable rules. Also at the same time, the decision to prosecute with people was taken out of the hands of the police and placed in the hands of the prosecution service. Before then, they could make up the evidence and also decide to prosecute you. How's that for a system, eh? I noticed that fairly recently UKIP was saying they wanted to reverse this. They wanted to get rid of the Crown Prosecution Service and let the police decide on prosecutions again. God forbid. God forbid. Now, soon after Pace was introduced in 1986, 3 years later, 1989, the old justice regime passed on not so quietly. With it, the idea that police can be trusted, and anyway corruption would be in a noble cause. And that the key moment was in 1989, when Lord Lane, the Lord Chief Justice, said that the police must have lied in the case of the Guildford Four. I think they were represented by Michael Mansfield, actually. The police must have lied. Now that was really, the Lord Chief Justice said this. Before that you had Denning, and I think Lane also refused to admit there was anything wrong. And for a while after that, something called due process led the field. Now there are two theories of policing. One is crime control, and the other is due process. Crime control says, get some criminals, get them convicted, never mind what you do wrong along the way. Due process means that it's more important, it doesn't matter if 10 guilty men get away, as long as one innocent man doesn't get convicted. Well, quite a number of people spent a year or two in prison because of Challoner, yeah? It's all very well to say, crime control, just bag, if a few people get caught who don't deserve to be caught, you try being one of them, yeah? You try sitting in a cell with something you haven't done. So in 1989, the old system of belief in the police and so on collapsed. Now the next phase, after that, has been a long retreat since then from Peelian policing, or at least Peelian policing in theory, into crime control by a force which is increasingly remote from the community and increasingly politically motivated. Well, we don't see the police embedded in our communities anymore, do we? We see them driving around in vans. Peter Hitchens asked what they're doing all day. Driving and don't patrol anymore. And also, of course, they've become increasingly politically motivated. They're not citizens' uniforms. The fears of the Georgian Englishmen about centralised policing were well founded, and we're seeing them increasingly evidence how right they were. The police are now largely disinterested in burglary, fraud and shoplifting. No wonder the police are discontented, even without complaints about bullying behaviour. If you go to the police about fraud, they're likely to tell you to report it to something called a website called Action Fraud. Notice the word action. So you think, well, if I report it to Action Fraud, it means it's just a way of the police learning about my case, doing something about it. They don't do anything. It's a black hole. And this emerged in the press quite recently. Action Fraud isn't anything about action. Also, a few days ago, two retired policemen say that even the statistics they produce are fraudulent. They're not including crimes of identity theft, which is one of the worst frauds you can have inflicted on you is identity theft. They're just leaving them out of the figures. Now, there's nothing new about fraudulent police statistics. In the early 90s, there was a big scandal about the police increasing their clear-up rates by visiting prisons and persuading prisoners to admit to all kinds of things they hadn't done, which then counted as solved crimes. Yeah? One division of the police was able to increase its clear-up rate from a third to three-quarters in a year. How did they do that? It suddenly became so much more efficient. No, they just got people to say, oh, well, I'll take that one. And obviously they were offered some quid pro quo for this. And then there was Operation Bumblebee. It was against burglary. And Paul Condon announced how well it was all going, and the police clear-up rates for burglary were increased. Actually, the arrests for burglary were going down. What was happening was they were simply persuading people to be convicted of burglary to admit to all kinds of offences. One man was arrested, and it was found that he confessed to dozens of crimes which he couldn't possibly have committed. They fiddled the figures. Not unusual, you know. Lots of government fiddle figures all the time. Now the police claim they can't police in the old way with patrols and so on because they're short of manpower. But in London we're told that there are 900 WFG officers. What's WFG, you must ask? Well, I call it Witchfinder General. People who are set to watch the public for any sign of political incorrectness and see if they can be leaned on to shut up. But I'll come back to political correctness later. Now, are the police really short of manpower? Well, Peter Hitchens collected some figures on this, and I looked at the figures, and I calculated that on the basis of what he says, the number of policemen per capita in the country is over 50% higher than it was in the 1960s. So even after the cuts that were the May government and earlier to introduce since, and Cameron government's introduced since 2010. So if they've got more police in the 1960s per capita, why are they so short of manpower? I don't know, but it certainly requires some answering, doesn't it? Now there's nothing new about political policing. The police have become increasingly politically motivated. There's nothing new about political policing, but it used to be directed against people who were trying to turn the society upside down on the left. Yeah? It was the communists they were after. Now there's a very curious reversal here which shows how what odd business politics is. The political policing against individuals and groups is now directed against people who want to stop this society from being eradicated. They call it far right. Well, far right means people who don't want the society destroyed. That's what it means, isn't it? Anyone who wants to preserve their own society counts as far right. If they join up with other people and try and campaign for it, then the police would like to shut us down. There's a baffling naivety about this still in this country. Too many people believe that this political policing only happens in nasty foreign countries and not here. It's been happening here for generations. A small example was Sussex in the 1990s. There was a meeting held somewhere on the Sussex coast. About 20 people there, a lot of old age pensioners, and it was being addressed by another pensioner who happened to be a PhD in history. And he was giving a talk about China in the 19th century. Suddenly the door swung open and in rolled 8 or 9 policemen in full riot gear. And the audience looked at the policemen in riot gear and looked bemused. What are they doing here? The police looked a bit bemused too. Why were they doing that? Was it an accident? No, it wasn't. The idea was that people higher up the line could report to the press or anybody else. There's a far right meeting being held, and look, these people are so diabolically dangerous, we can't even send ordinary policemen there. It'd be too dangerous. They've got to arrive dressed up for military combat. That kind of drip of propaganda against people who want to preserve this society. Well, everybody here has probably experienced it and knows about it. But the public generally don't, and it comes as a shock to them when they get involved in any kind of organised activity to preserve this society and find out what's going on. The Tommy Robinson demonstration. So whatever you think of Tommy Robinson, the point is he's inconvenient to the state. They don't like him and they'd like to get rid of him. They'd like to have him murdered, in fact, if they can, and they're not too scrupulous about that. Now, the Tommy Robinson demonstrations, without which he'd probably be dead, it was quite obvious that the police were trying to stir up trouble. They weren't trying to prevent offences and disturbance. They were trying to make sure disturbance happened. So that the Daily Mail, particularly, could take photographs and say violence erupts at, the usual headline. It was quite obvious what they were doing. But the general public just don't believe this until they come across it. Now, apart from policing against specific groups, which is not new at all, what we've also had since Blair's election in 1997 is increasing politicisation of the police against mainstream life. One of the commissioners, after Blair was elected, during a general election, he had a poster on his car, his official car, saying, "Vote Labour." How obvious they have to make it that this is a political force. The police are a political force. What's happening is the aim is for the police to create a regime of fear in which any slip in the contortions of improved language about the subjects we all know about, the contentious ones, means possible arrest and disgrace. Of course, it's not sold that way. The story is benign concern for people's feelings. That's not the essence of it. I mean, Douglas Murray said that this attempt to control everybody's language is what he called dark stuff. Everybody's going to have to go around frightened to say anything about anything, just in case. I mean, in every office now, as he says, you've got people watching for any sign of political incorrectness. You can lose your job over this quite easily. And Douglas Murray says that people who are in a position to be able to speak without losing jobs, like authors like him and so on, or the self-employed, have a duty to speak. The American political commentator Mark Levin said that the diabolical genius of Marxism-Leninism is that it provides a roadmap for autocrats to persuade millions of people to support their own enslavement to government. The power-hungry of many political shades, or none, have grasped the usefulness of the methods used by Marxism-Leninism. It's been imported by globalism and imported by fake conservatives and globalists to try and create a terror state. If you proceed down the road of saying that nobody must hear anything that offends them because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, where does that lead? You're going to have a terror state, aren't you? You can't bring... The cure is worse than disease. Political correctness purports to protect feelings. It's really to create a tyranny where we all live in fear. And the police are gradually moving away from real crime fighting to thought control. In fact, it's rather worse than that, because what's happening, what the government is trying to do, is turn society away from modern rationality to the world, back to medieval superstition and magical thinking. The person who infringes the PC codes is not just a wrong speaker. He's portrayed as some kind of witch respiting cells with incalculable consequences for society. And you can see this with people mouthing off on buses against other people. You've seen them in The Sun and the Mail. Somebody has a go at somebody on the bus, says something racist or something, and it becomes a huge story in the press. A bigger story than somebody robbing a bank. And all somebody's done is just mouth off. They got a bit annoyed that day, and the bus was full. They got a bit annoyed. They mouth off at somebody. This is built up. This is like witchcraft. The witch emits a form of words which are just words, but because of the particular way the words are put together, they can have enormous ramifications. They can cause things to happen. The cows give sour milk. The hens won't lay. This is the essence of political. This is the PC. Is the return of witchcraft, the return of the concept of witchcraft, and witches that have to be hunted out, eradicated. If you read in a book on medieval history about a child who appeared and was recognised as the Messiah, and emperors and kings all lined up to pay homage, competing to pay homage, you'd say, goodness, weren't they credulous and superstitious in the Middle Ages? That's exactly what happened in London a few weeks ago. When Greta Thunberg arrived, the leading politicians were grovelling, falling over one another to grovel to her and grovel more than the next one. I virtue signalled more than you did. This is like saying something straight out of the Middle Ages. Greta Thunberg is obviously a very unhappy child who's being used by some powerful and rich people. It's a very sad situation to be in. But they were all falling over themselves to worship Greta. It's quite extraordinary. Now, an increasing part of police work is actually the real meaning of all this PC stuff is to deal with the loss of legitimacy which the regime has suffered since the end of the Cold War. when what's been called the Long War ended in 1914 with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, when that happened, this is the way Philip Bobbitt explains it in a very difficult but eminent book called The Shield of Achilles. Before the collapse of communism, the basis of the state, the modern state, was the nation state. The nation state promised you certain things: physical security, economic security, and cultural security. Now, this has now been moved by the globalists into what Bobbitt calls the market state. What the market state is something which says, all those protections the nation state, that's all old hat. What we're going to now is offer you something much better. We're going to offer the opportunity state. The market state offers you such unprecedented opportunities that you won't mind losing the things the nation state gave you. Well, 30 years on, where are the opportunities? Certainly a lot of migrants have found big opportunities through the global system. How many people in this country have benefited from globalism in terms of opportunity? Dead-end jobs, low pay, insecurity, impossible housing costs, yeah? There haven't been any opportunities. That's why the regime is losing credibility. It's economic. And that's why there's populism. So the police are now... The regime needs to come up with an alibi for why things aren't working out. And what they've done is they've come up with the alibi that isms and lack of politically correct thought is the real cause of society not emerging into the utopia which was promised. And so the witch finders are now saying, look, we're trying to bring about the utopia by rooting out the witches, the nationalists, yeah, the right wing, the ism promoters. It's a lot easier a lot easier from the point of view of individual police having to go out on the streets. You sit at the computer, they take away coffee on one side and a packet of hobnobs on the other, getting fatter and fatter and looking at the screen all day. What's regarded as a good job these days? And you've got hundreds of people doing this, and there'll be more soon, I've no doubt, among the 20,000 who are being hired. Everybody's got to be watched. Witch finders rooting out obstacles to utopia. That's the alibi story that's being told for the failure of globalism to produce the benefits that people were told 30 years ago they would get from this system. If you like, it's a little joke, like a little joke I saw on a T-shirt with the police and suppressing political incorrectness. The beatings will continue until morale improves. Douglas Murray puts it this way, that the kids are being told, well, the reason you haven't got housing issues, don't worry about that. These are your local issues. Look to the stars and look to fixing the world. And you look up there and you see, yes, it's political correctness we need, more political correctness, more diversity. When we have perfect diversity and nobody utters any isms, then the true utopia which humans are capable of will emerge. Well, if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Now, political policing for social control is added to by general bullying. I mean, the fact is, a lot of police going around the street now, nothing like even the police officers who were around in the 50s. Some of them are just feral gangs who are taught a standardised system of bullying, which actually deserves a talk in itself. The thing about bullying is, as is well understood by psychologists, it's addictive. If people can get into a position of bullying other people, they tend to become addicted to it, and they need their daily supply of bullying. And people who've been in the police, a lot of them are addicted to bullying. They can't stand not getting their bullying supply. And the police have a range of tactics which you can codify when they stop people in the street. There are lots of videos on YouTube, you can see them doing. If you watch a lot of them, you can see the system they're using. What they're doing is not just an individual initiative, it's something they've learnt parrot fashion off a computer. It's a sort of ping-pong between various members of street teams directed against the subject, involving a limited number of interesting tactics. Flattery. They use flattery. You're a sensible man, you'll want to do what we want. Personal disparagement to undermine you. Invented laws, that's a favourite. They make up the law as they go along. Most people they're talking to won't know the difference. Special pleading that police should be allowed latitude to do what they like because things are so bad at the moment. This is called becoming a bit of a joke on YouTube. Current climate. The story goes, why are you asking me to do this, officer, when you've no right to ask me to do it? And they say, well, in the current climate, sir. Actually, there are other versions of that. There's, with everything going on in this day and age, they say. And you're supposed to think, well, my goodness, things are so bad now that it really wouldn't be right for you to stand in the way of the police exceeding their powers. That's the idea. It's actually moral blackmail. And then of course, perhaps the worst the activity by the feral gangs is crime farming, trying to provoke behaviour which could allow them to make an arrest. They claim a Section 5 offence. They provoke people, and then somebody swears at them or something. They say, we're arresting you for a Section 5 public order offence. Actually, most of these things that people say are not Section 5 order offences because there's case law on that. Swearing at the police in general is not a public order offence. The reasoning behind that is the police are used to this kind of language, otherwise they shouldn't be in the job. So they can't claim that they're really upset or offended by it. But most people don't know that. So they're farming for behaviour to provoke an arrest. As you can see on the Tommy Robinson demonstration, they're doing the same thing. It's obvious they're farming for crime. Now, during the 1980s, when Sir Peter Rimbuck was police commissioner in London, he paid for a consultant's report about the Metropolitan Police, and various interesting things emerged from that. They said that it really has no corporate identity. They said it's a lot of warring factions, and what was in common is that there was widespread contempt for street officers, who were regarded by one respondent as the leftovers. People are hired, the better people put on other people's work, and the worst people get sent out on the street. Now that's important because most of what people see of the police, unless they're in police stations all the time, is street officers, isn't it? So if the street officers are the worst people in the police, you can get a rather jaded view of the police from looking at street officers. Intrinsically, being a street officer is a difficult and worthwhile job, but they don't seem to be doing it too well to me, but that's just my opinion. They'll probably claim there were reasons why they behave in the way they do, all too often. So I thought Peter Rimbuck's report was quite interesting about the attitude towards street officers. If people are put on the street and they feel they're being put there because they're leftovers, they're not going to be too happy with us, are they? So that doesn't help put them in a good mood. Now the police would like to have full powers, which they don't have at the moment and should never be given. But they often behave as though they've got them. In fact, often they don't even realise they haven't. Because, as I understand it, the police are given more training in things. There are more modules on training courses now on equality and diversity than there are on law. They simply don't know any law, which is actually quite advantageous, because if you don't know any law as a policeman, you can quote anything, and if it turns out to be wrong, you can say, well, it was an innocent mistake. But these are the powers the police would like to have and haven't got. I've got an acronym for it, DEPS, D-E-P-S. Detain, enter, punish and search. Now take an example of two of those. Southgate Station, a while back, black guy, Christian preacher, standing outside the station reading the Bible. The police came up, bundled him into a van, took him several miles away and dumped him. Now that's an example of detain and punish. The police were applying a punishment, dumping him somewhere. Yeah, that was a punishment. Police aren't supposed to apply punishments, that's for the courts. It's one of the very important part of Peel's rules. Police are not there to judge people, they're not there to avenge, they're not punishers. But they found ways of creating a system, an alternative justice system, where the system itself can punish people without ever going near a court. So the Southgate preacher, he actually got 2,500. Should have been a bit more. So they detained him wrongly, had no reason to detain him, claimed a breach of the peace when there wasn't one, and then they punished him by dumping him somewhere. Detain and punish. And the other two are search and enter. Search, well, that's easily fiddled. The police would like to have the power. Police would like to have the power to detain anybody they like, any time, for no reason. They'd like to have the power to search anybody, any time, for no reason. They'd like to have the power to enter premises at any time, for no reason, without a warrant. And they also want the power to punish people because they feel like it. I don't like you. You haven't been terribly nice to me. Don't you like the police? We'll punish you. That's the way they think. Because the sad fact of the matter is a lot of the people who join the police, they end up with personality disorders. Power goes to their head. This is how it works. You give people petty power over other people, they can become deranged. If they've got any tendency towards personality disorders, it'll tend to bring it out. And then the other people who are weaker with personalities then come under their sway. This is a really serious problem with police on the street. Now, I want to come near the end now, but I want to come to the interview, the police interview, the formal police interview, which is now recorded. Well, the police are not there in these police interviews to make an independent and fair assessment of whether somebody's done something. The purpose of the police interview is to get you into court by hook or by crook. And it was very interesting to watch the police interview, a snatch of it, with Field Marshal Bramall. He was arrested for torturing children. Yep. And he was trying to reason with the police. He was saying, look, is it really likely that a British Field Marshal with an impeccable record like mine would torture children for fun? Police aren't interested in that. They weren't interested. Things that you can say to affirm your innocence are of no interest to the police at all. All they're interested in is something which can be used to get you into court. And one of the questions I understood they asked him was, can you swim? Can you swim? What's that got to do with it? Well, I think what that came from is that Carl Beach, the mentally ill man, who the police decided to choose to believe because they thought they could make some career advantage out of it, he actually presented a snatch of video which he claimed was a paedophile pool party. In fact, it was a snatch of video from a culture club video, promotional video. He just took a snatch of it, yeah? This is how bad the evidence, Carl Beach's evidence was. Whether there's any truth in Beach's claims, I've no idea. But he didn't have any evidence of it. He was a madman. He shouldn't have been sent to prison for 18 years. He needed a psychiatrist. Cressida Dick has now been forced into, or is being forced into an inquiry in how the police came to take Carl Beach so seriously. Very inconvenient. So Field Marshal Bramall, he didn't expect at the age of around 90 he'd be interviewed by the police in a formal recorded interview. He really didn't know the ropes, so he was trying to affirm his innocence, and he didn't understand that police are not interested by that in that. Punishment by process is almost a new parallel court system. The appalling, the police can keep you on a string, make your life miserable, and they're punishing you. Often the treatment by the police preceding a trial can be worse than the trial and the punishment itself. People are kept in limbo, their lives are in limbo for a long time. And then there's the appalling cautioning system. Nobody should receive a criminal record without going through a court. If people accept a caution, it's in fact what they're doing is that they're accepting a criminal record in practice. If you go to court and you're convicted, there is an appeal system. There's no appeal system against accepting a caution. No formal appeal system. And people are brought into the police station, and they're told by the policeman, you've committed a crime, but don't worry, you won't have to go to court. Sign this caution, you'll be off out the police station in 10 minutes. And they don't even really know whether they've committed a crime. They often don't know. I mean, some of these things are so vague, like public order offences, what's an offence and what isn't. They think to themselves, the policeman must know what he's talking to me about. If he says I've committed a crime, I must have done. So people are accepting these cautions. So the way it works is you go out on the street, you provoke people, and then you arrest them, claiming a Section 5 offence, and then you can get them to accept a caution. And they've done nothing really, and they've done nothing that would stand up in court, and they end up with effectively a criminal record. In fact, a friend of mine was telling, he's a nurse, he was telling me about a nurse he met who had gone to a demonstration. She just completed her training. And she went to a demonstration and got hauled in by the police, accused of a public order offence, and she was foolish enough to sign a caution. And now her career's wrecked. Yeah, her career's been completely wrecked after years of nurse training. This is really a good idea. I think the cautioning system should be abolished. So, what are the answers to all this? Well, firstly, we need a new management of the police to turn back towards Pelian principles. We need a genuine complaint system. The cautioning system to be abolished, and a moderation of the adversarial system of justice, which generates a lot of police bad behaviour, since the police often see themselves as in a war against the public. Not long ago, Michael Brownbrook spoke here, a retired police inspector. He said people used to love the job, now they hate it. And he said he tells them, look, if you really hate the job, don't go waste your own one and only life going year after year in a miserable, hateful job. Leave, pack it in, yeah? Because they want to get the pension. Now, if the police were reformed and behaved better, it would be a better job, it would be better for society, it'd be better for the police themselves. Who wants to look back on having joined the police thinking you were going to help the public? And then you think all I did was help a self-serving bureaucracy, fiddling every which way. It's not much of a life to look back on, is it? You spend your working life doing that thing, even if you get a pension out of it. So reform of the police would be interesting. The police would be important and worthwhile for the police themselves. So finally, in the immortal words of Dixon, good night all.
If you have enjoyed watching this video, please consider subscribing by clicking the button below. And don't forget to click the bell icon if you wish to be notified of new uploads, which are posted on a regular basis. Thank you for watching.